Hello everyone, myself Navyatha Ravi, working as Assistant Professor in MLR Institute of Technology. Today I am going to discuss about Introduction to Relational Model, and the overview of this presentation includes integrity constraints over relations. The next topic is integrity constraint over relations. So what is an integrity constraint? As we already discussed, constraint is nothing but a set of rules to maintain consistency of a database. So here integrity constraint is a condition that ensures that correct insertion of data and prevents unauthorized data access, thereby preserving consistency of data. That means integrity constraints takes over the action of unauthorized accessing and prevention of redundancies, each and everything to maintain consistency of a database. So this concept includes key constraints, specifying key constraints in SQL, foreign key constraints, specifying foreign key constraints in SQL, and general constraints. So coming to the key constraints, we have already discussed the key constraints, number of key constraints in previous slides. That means we have already discussed about primary key, foreign key, unique, not null, right, default, check. These are the primary key constraints. So let us discuss the key constraints here in a detailed manner, and how we can able to specify those key constraints by using SQL, and in detail about foreign key constraints and how we can able to specify those foreign key constraints in SQL, and last one, general constraints. So key constraints, the basic keys in DBMS we used to represent about super key, candidate key and primary key. We all know what is primary key. Primary key which is used to identify the elements in a unique manner. So the primary, if at all the attribute has been represented as primary key, then that attribute must, then the values of that attribute must be unique. For example, let us consider here SID name, SID name 1, 2, ABC, here also ABC, 3, XYZ. This is my table. If at all I used to consider SID as primary key, then it must contain unique values plus not null. So SID has been considered as primary key, then it must contain unique values and it must not be null. That column must not be null. That is the rule for primary key constraint, right? So here we can consider one column as primary key, or else two columns can be considered as a primary key also, right? So what is candidate key? Two or more columns can be combined together, two or more columns can be combined together to retrieve data uniquely, then it is called as candidate key, right? What is super key? N number of columns can be considered to retrieve the data uniquely, that is called as super key. So that's why here we have represented this diagrammatic representation. See, super key, here we can consider for example 5 columns. Let us consider 5 columns. That means SID plus name plus age, right? So by considering all these, we can retrieve the data uniquely. What is candidate key? By considering some of these, for example SID plus age, not all the 5, not all the 5. Let us take 2. In super key we have to consider 5 to retrieve the data uniquely. In candidate key we have to consider the columns only 2. By considering only 2, we can able to retrieve the data uniquely, right? Primary key, let us take only SID. Only depending upon this SID we can able to retrieve the data uniquely. That is what the basic difference. That is why here super key is a superset, candidate key is a subset of super key, primary key is a subset of candidate key. That is what the difference, right? So key constraints. So how we can able to specify these key constraints, especially primary key, foreign key constraints, by using SQL. So if at all here in this example, let us consider the student table. In that student table, we are considering SID as a primary key, right? So here the student table, create table student, that is what the table name. which consists of attributes. What are the attributes? SID, name, address, phone number, age. These are nothing but 5 different attributes with the data types that we are going to discuss. And here I am going to mention here, consider SID as a primary key. So, how we can able to mention that one? Here, comma, primary key of SID. So, primary key of SID, primary key of the column that you are going to represent as a primary key. That means this SID must not contain duplicate values, and these SID, this column must not contain null values. So, the column SID column must be unique and must not contain null values. Why? Because it is defined as a primary key. So, therefore, SID will be a primary key for the student table. So, in this manner, we used to represent SID as a primary key. Next, what is foreign key? As I said before, foreign key is nothing but an attribute, is nothing but a column name or an attribute or a field value in a table that acts as primary key in another table. So, here in student marks table, we have 2 different tables, student marks table and student details table. So, here ID considered as an foreign key here. This ID which acts as a primary key in the student details table, that is called as, here this one is called as foreign key. A foreign key is a key in one table which acts as a primary key in another table. So, ID in student marks is a foreign key in this table which acts as a primary key in another table. So, here we used to relate these 2 tables by using primary key constraint. So, here the foreign key is used to link 2 tables together through a primary key. That is what we call as foreign key. So, how we can able to represent this foreign key constraint in SQL? Just like a primary key, how we have represented, how we can able to represent this foreign key constraint in SQL. The same manner, create table. Here we have already created, for example, let us create student details table here, which of ID, name and course. Okay. Create table student details. Create table student details which consists of ID. ID is of integer, some name is of some character, comma, course is of some character of some 20. And in the table, student detail table, what is the primary key here? In ID only, right? So, what we have to mention here? Primary key of which column? ID. So, here you have to represent ID. So, in this way you have to create a table for student details. Now, we have to create table for student marks with the help of foreign key. Why? Because we are relating the student marks table with the student details table. So, how we have to create that one? Create table student marks which consists of attributes ID, marks, and here the primary key is nothing but ID. In the table, the primary key is ID and the foreign key is also the ID which is referencing the key, primary key of student details, right? This is the foreign key ID which references the previous table. What is the table? Student details ID. So, in this manner, so this is the foreign key which is referencing the primary key, the student details primary key. That is the thing we have to represent in the query format. So, create table student marks. So, student marks is nothing but what? This is the table. You are creating this table. Create table student marks which contains. So, here I am going to write create table student marks. Create table student marks which contains ID which acts as what? Primary key, comma, marks. This is also integer, comma, in this table this will be primary key of ID, comma, here this is acts as a foreign key also. So, foreign key of ID, this foreign key is referencing what? Student details table. So, here we have to write foreign key of ID referencing student details, references student details, which column? Student details, ID column. So, ID you have to mention here. In this manner, we used to specify foreign key constraints in SQL. So, here you have to note down some of the points while creating the foreign key constraints. You can't delete a record in a primary table if matching records exist in the relating table. This is the first thing. You can't change a primary key value in the primary table if that record has related records in the related table. You can't enter a value in the foreign key field of the related table that doesn't exist in the primary key of the primary table. Let us discuss these three with a simple example. Let us consider two tables. What are those two tables? This is nothing but student details table. This is nothing but marks table. Student details table, marks table. SID, name. Here SID, marks. 1, 2, some X, some A. This is the name. 1, 2, 100, 200. So, what is the first point here? You can't delete a record in the primary table if matching records exist in the related table. These two are related with each other. Why? Because we have considered this one as foreign key, we have considered this one as primary key, and we have considered this one as foreign key. That means this key is referencing to this table. This key is referencing to this table. That's why these two tables are related with each other. What is the first point meant for? You can't delete this data. For example, if I want to delete 1, I can't delete it in the primary table. Why? Because it is already related with the another table here. If at all I used to delete this one, then what about the data existing over here? It will become inconsistent. It is wrong, right? So, that is the reason if at all you want to delete a data, first of all you have to delete in the dependent table. That means you have to delete in the marks table, then you have to delete it in the primary table. That is the meaning of the first point, right? Next, the second one, you can't change a primary key value in the primary table if that record has related records. In later on, if at all you want to change the primary key of this table, for example, initially you have represented SID as primary key. Later on, you want to represent name as primary key. That you must not do. Why? Because you have already related these two tables. This foreign key is depending upon the primary key of SID in this table. Then how you can able to modify now the primary key? It is not right, right? So, that is the meaning of the second point. You can't change the primary key value in the primary table if that record has already related. Next, the third one, you can't enter a value in the foreign key field of the related table that does not exist in the primary key of the primary table. That means, if at all I used to enter, for example, I used to enter here 3, some 300, it will not accept. Why? Because the student has not been enrolled in the primary table. How can he able to get the marks, right? First of all, he has to enroll his details, then he have to get the marks after writing the exams. Before entering the data in the primary table, how he can able to enter his marks? It's not correct, right? So, that is the meaning of the third one. You can't enter a value in the foreign key field. That means here in this table, you can't enter a new value. You can't enter a new value in this table, which whatever the value that is not there in the primary table. You can't enter a value in the foreign key field of the related table that does not exist in the primary key of the primary table. So, these are the 3 points that you have to keep in mind while specifying the foreign key constraints in SQL. Next, the last concept is general constraints. Sometimes it is necessary to specify more general constraints. That means, here generally while entering the data into a table, we used to give some constraints like more than above 18, age 18, we have to enter the data. Less than 18, we must restrict the data. That is the general constraint I am going to give. right? So that will be represented by using in the form of check constraints that we have already discussed in the previous sessions. So sometimes it is necessary to specify more general constraints. For example, we may require that student ages be within the certain range of values, or else let us consider this one with an example. Create table student, SID name, age, int, and check that age must be greater than or equal to 18. Here, this is what a general constraint that we are going to check whether we are inserting the data greater than 18 only. If at all we used to insert 18, it will not accept. The constraint will be violated. This is what comes under general constraints. So, in this session, we have discussed about various key constraints. What are those key constraints? Key constraints, specifying key constraints with SQL. Next, foreign key constraints, specifying foreign key constraints with SQL. Next, general constraints. Right, these are the things that we have discussed, and we have discussed about introduction to relational model and everything. Thank you.